get the couch, huh? Okay.
We get the couch. Sorry.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being on the stage. This is fantastic. By the way, we've got like 18 minutes, but if you guys have like a good question that's not like a veiled pitch, but like something you want really, really need, I'm gonna do like 3 minutes to the end. I'm gonna like find somebody who wants it and see if we can fit in one question you can shout out from the audience. This is actually a super fun panel for me to get to do because I love cutting through hype. We've gotten through a couple years now of like really wild speculation about what bots have been delivering on, which led major players to rush into the space and have like kind of visible failures while people like are developing bots for you to shop for shoes on through message clients and just creating these boisterous projects with kind of weird consequences. Adi, I know that you just launched a product. What I'm interested in is you've had a product for about 6 months now. Without going through all the nitty gritty, I'm interested to hear what people are coming to you with their expectations.
Okay, hold on a second.
For what you're going to deliver on them with all the excitement in the space, and what's failed and like what you've learned about like the nuts and bolts creation of what works in bots outside of like hoping they're going to deliver on everything. And then Gary's here for the scathing cynicism.
So we, Sisense, basically created a chatbot framework. So I'm just going to give a little bit more of a context. Sisense is a big data company that allows companies to simplify their complex data. And at some point, let's say a year, 2 years ago, we understood that data becomes overwhelming.
I don't want to touch that because there's wires going into it.
People can and want to see data, but in small doses. So if we have a conversation, I might ask you a question and you get one answer, and you can move on with your life. This is how our business life, at least, going through. So we've decided to connect our environment, our Sisense environment, to a chatbot framework, maybe Facebook, Slack, Skype, whatever is out there for us to connect to, allowing end user and business users to basically interact and ask, you know, what are my sales today? Or how do I do from quota point of view? How many employees do I have? And get an instant answer towards this question. Now, I wanted to emphasize that chatbots are not just your usual text. So you're all texting. Some of you are doing it right now, and this is how we interact today. But chats can be lights and sound and everything in our environment. And bot can interact with us even if we don't see a screen in front of our eyes. We're going to talk about it later, but that's what we do at Sisense.
Right, and one of the things, you know, just to clarify the nature of the conversation, we talk about bot, really what we're talking about in this conversation specifically is a piece of software that the way you interact with it is conversation, right? The way you interact with it is by bringing your sort of like, the user interface is your inquiry and the way you frame that in speech, and the result is what have you. For years, you've been saying that this is sort of maybe like the wrong golden goose, or like skeptical at least about how this is going to deliver. And backstage we were talking, you were like, I've been adamant for years about why that is. And what could you frame for us sort of what your position has been and what moments have made you feel most vindicated?
Well, so I'm not skeptical about bots as an interface. I should be clear about that. In the long term, I think the Star Trek vision that you're going to talk into a computer, it's going to answer your question, is a great vision. And we have tastes of that now with Siri and Google Now and so forth. I just think we haven't anywhere near delivered. I mean, think AI has been here since the 1950s, and every year people say, well, AI is about 20 years away. And they said that in 1950, in 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, and they're still saying, you know, real AI is 20 years away, or maybe a few people think it's here now, but I think they're deluded. So I have consistently said we're not doing the fundamental research that we need to do in order to get ahead, in order to really be able to do these things well and at scale. So in 1965, there was what I think of as the original bot, which was Eliza. I don't know how many people out here know Eliza, but Eliza was a psychiatrist that you could communicate basically by text messaging through. And some people thought Eliza was a real psychiatrist, and they would sit there and they would explain the troubles that they had with their boyfriend, and they were taken in and they believed it. Other people realized pretty quickly this can't possibly be a person because it's so freaking stupid. And
It repeated back to you a lot,
it
right?
had
That was the
keywords. It
thing?
would look for keywords. So you'd mention boyfriend, and it would say, well, how do you feel about your mother? And to some people that seemed really clever because there's some relation between boyfriends and mothers and how the mother thinks about the boyfriend, but it's a limited parlor trick. And it does, pretty soon you discover that it doesn't really care what you're saying. I guess like someone talking at a bar who really doesn't give a shit about you or something like that. And it's not very deep. And you have the same kind of conversation with Siri. I mean, well, if you can even have a conversation with Siri. You talk to Siri, but it's mostly kind of one sentence at a time. It's not understanding your world. So we're developing models of each other. I'm trying to understand what kind of interviewer you are. You're trying to understand what kind of person I am giving the discussion. And you start to understand me better and so forth. It's very cumulative. And we don't really have AI systems that can do that can build models of the world. What I would say I feel vindicated about, since you used that word, or a word like that, is I have been saying for a number of years, about 5 years, that deep learning is wildly overrated. And most people will think, well, Marcus is totally wrong. I wrote this in the New Yorker in 2012. I said, deep learning is not all it's cracked up to be. And I said that it had a lot of serious problems with language understanding, with common sense reasoning, with inference in general, that it was good for perception. I think this is basically right. So deep learning works really well for speech perception, but nobody has a deep learning natural language understanding system that could understand what this conversation is about and answer queries about it and help you to do new things. Things in this world are still very narrow. They're still like Eliza. I've got templates. I'm looking for particular words or syntactic frames and giving answers around those. And as long as you stick to the dialogue, you're fine. And then the cleverest thing that people figured out in this world is that they can pick up tone of voice so they can realize when you're mad and they'll send you to a live human being because the robot's not getting it.
And I think, so that's an interesting distinction, which is when you brought up Eliza, it speaks to a problem I think we see in the software today, which is the difference between you're using a bot and your experience of it is either gratifying and not. And instead of being gratifying because it's providing you with deep insight, it's sort of aesthetically gratifying because it seems to get sort of it sort of demonstrates a glib understanding of what insight might look like.
Well, if you look at the Turing test, there's a lot of tricks people have learned to play, right? The Turing test is you try to fool a human judge into thinking that a computer is actually a human. And the tricks have varied from like pretending to be paranoid so you don't really have to answer the question. So, you ask me what the weather is today and I say, why should I tell you? And then it sounds like a human being because maybe like a crazy human being would ask you this. Somebody won the Turing test a couple years ago by pretending to be a 13-year-old boy from Odessa. And the idea is, well, it doesn't really understand English that well, so you forgive it some. And it's a 13-year-old boy, so it's sarcastic. It doesn't really answer your question. But if you ask it a question like, is a couch bigger than a chair? It has no idea because it doesn't really understand the world.
Yeah.
And so it'll try to sidestep it.
You're tricking the way you make it seem intelligent is by tricking the expectation of the person who's
But it's
seeing
all
it.
about expectation. You said it
Right.
yourself. In software today, before you click a button, before you move to the next window, you have expectation and therefore your reaction to what happened after you click on a button. Very same thing with the bot. If you tell the user that this is a robot and it tries to help you as much as it can, you're lowering the expectations and therefore you get a better result. That's one comment. The second comment is that many of the chatbots today are trying to create some kind of a hybrid mode. So whenever the bot feels like it cannot help, it's not going to repeat the question or give you some nonsense. It's just going to pass you through a real person behind the scenes.
I've seen that,
I
yeah.
know many companies that are doing it very successfully, and they're selling like crazy. So this is the second one. The third comment is that look at us as human beings. I don't know how many of you have been to a psychologist session or therapist in the last few years, but what these guys are doing, and my wife is a psychologist, so I hope I'm not creating some mess now, but they're asking questions. They listen and they ask questions. They allow you to talk. They don't give you any advice in most cases. You're the one who's giving the advices. So let's say that there is a middle ground in that sense.
Well then, so you're developing a piece of software. When we talk about people feeling gratified by seeing a piece of software and thinking, this gets it, this is giving me the thing. How do you, is it in the development of the software itself, or is it expectation setting and you as a business person, how you present? How do you get your How do you, in the creation of your product, ensure that the person using it is like, shit, this is smart, okay, this is getting it?
So I'm not trying to solve the entire problem on the first day. Everything is baby steps. So we know that people have tremendous amount of data, and we're not trying to figure out everything on their first day. Now, any question that they ask requires some kind of feedback. A feedback can be a question, is this what you wanted? But that feels very much like a robot and not a human being. However, if you ask a question and you get an answer and you react accordingly, I can score your question and my answer, and others can enjoy it. So basically this, let's say human bot, not really, but a data bot, can understand from your question and its answers if it's doing good or doing bad, and it's going to reduce the amount of wrong answers and give a better answers all the time. So it's a learning system, but as I said, baby steps. Answer the simplest questions, and during time we evolve. This very similar to human evolution.
I think there's a commercial question and a scientific question. The commercial question is, given that the technology is actually pretty limited now, can we use it well? So we don't have AI systems that really understand human conversation, but we have AI systems that can pick up on certain superficial properties of them and sometimes behave in intelligent ways. And commercially, you're trying to figure out, how can I push that? What are the niches for which that makes sense and I can make money? The scientific question is, how could you actually push the bots so they really do understand the nuances of human conversation? It could be that that's 20 years out, but we might have interesting commercial fruit right now. And so they're actually not identical questions.
And so going back before we get too distant from it, you've identified an interesting problem with the Turing test that really speaks to the way, I think, one of the problems with how we perceive a bot's usefulness right now. What do you think a more valuable replacement would be? Obviously, the Turing test again is determining a bot's intelligence via its appearance of intelligence. What do you think would be better?
Well, so I wrote a New Yorker piece, I think 2012 or 2013, where I suggested we should ditch the Turing test, and because it's just a measure really of human gullibility. It's not really a measure of the intelligence of the machine, so you can win without being intelligent at all. One of the things I suggested in that particular article was a comprehension challenge. So you show a video to a bot, and then you ask it questions. Breaking Bad was popular at the time, and so I said, like, if the machine can answer like why Walter White might want to take a hit out on Jesse, then you can say, well, it's watched these videos and it understands characters' motivations and so forth, it's intelligent. So if you could have a computer system that can watch an arbitrary video or read any kind of text and be able to answer questions about it, that's a sign of intelligence. Like, we expect any 15-year-old to be able to do that, to watch any television program and tell you what's going on in any video. So I thought that was one better measure. And this led to a kind of campaign to use a multiplicity of tests to replace the Turing test. So intelligence isn't a one-dimensional variable. There are many different things that go into it. Ranging from your comprehension to your ability to manipulate physical objects. So somebody else proposed what I'm not allowed to call the IKEA challenge, where you have to have a box of parts and some instructions and you make something. That's another measure of intelligence, if you can figure out how these very sparse instructions conspire with a physical world to make the object that you need. So I think there are many ways of measuring machine intelligence. There's not going to be just one, but certainly communication and understanding communication is part of it.
Well, we were backstage, and we were talking about, Gary just sold a company to Uber, and you're planning your next steps.
That's right.
You mentioned, regardless about how you were going to address that for a crowd, you said that you thought that a lot of talk about deep learning might be veering sort of off course of where you think the most interesting place in terms of the scientific question.
That's right. I gave a talk yesterday here, some people may have seen it, where I said that deep learning might be getting us stuck in a local maximum, which is to say sort of better than anything nearby, but it's nowhere near where we want to be. So it's very good at perception, identifying patterns and things like that, but it's not very good at abstract reasoning. It's not very good at language. And it doesn't really do the things that go into the human comprehension of the world. Common sense reasoning. It's very statistically driven. I gave the example of a robot sitting on the wrong side of a tree limb with a chainsaw, possibly cutting itself down along with the tree limb and falling. You don't want to have 50,000 trials or 1 million labeled examples of robots falling off of tree limbs with chainsaws doing harm to themselves and others. You want to have something that can reason from first principles. This is a bad idea. We don't have AI systems that are developing those first principles. And I think it's because there's so much short-term pressure to deliver profits now that people just are like, what can I do with the tools I have? instead of like, well, what would happen if I invented a power screwdriver? How would the world change?
So I said I would I'll get to one question. We've got 3 minutes just in case somebody's got like a good one, or we'll just keep it going. Is there a hand who wants to shout something out? Anybody?
We got one over here.
Yeah, there it is.
Would
Oh,
you?
there's a mic. That thing's huge.
It is.
I think the idea is you can throw it.
Oh, that's very
What would
sweet.
you say is your best forecast for how soon or how far away a bot would be able to not necessarily just trick a human or a gullible human into believing it's another human, but something that is actually of enough intelligence to be seen as at the same level, possibly?
Well, we should both take this, but the answer I would give is it depends on the domain in which the machine is interacting. So if you saw the movie Her, right, the Scarlett Johansson character can talk about anything. At the other extreme, you might only talk about sports scores, and like Siri can maybe have a conversation about sports scores. So the broader the domain, the more sophisticated the thing on the back end has to be. If you know, if there's only 2 ways of people asking the questions, you can build a bot now that'll work great. If there's an infinite number of things that people can ask, it's much harder. I think that to have a bot that's as flexible in conversation as the Scarlett Johansson character could be 20 or 30 or 40 years away. You also need a lot of human psychology that goes into that, understanding why people are asking questions. One of the interesting things about language is we don't say most of what it is that we're thinking. We have a lot of background, common shared knowledge that we're relying on that's not articulated. And building all that in is hard, and we're not making that much progress. Making narrower things that like maybe help you with the things that you ask while you're driving a car, maybe that's more limited. You're just asking about, what's my last text message? And if there's only 20 ways of asking that, then that's not hard to program, and we might be able to do that now.
So I tend to disagree with my friend here. I think that we see huge amount of progress in micro steps. And again, going back to evolution, evolution is a path of many micro advanced items. So you're getting better in small baby steps. If it's computer vision, if it's listening to language and translating it, and if you can, if you're reading any of the magazines that are machine learning or deep learning today, you see so many scholars, so many research around these micro projects that eventually they're going towards business use cases around the world. I think that in the next 5 years, we're going to see the next phase of evolution, at least from that point of view.
And we have one more quick one.
Now that we know we're a certain distance away, like from a technological perspective of getting these chatbots to be, a certain level of quote unquote human. But how do you think of kind of the moral implications of making something seem so human that is actually just a computer? I know my therapist isn't going to take my most personal thoughts and sell them to a marketing company, but how do you kind of fit that moral conversation in with the technological one?
And we are out of time. We are actually out of time. I think that's a pretty hard question. I think sometimes that has to do with the people writing the terms of service and what they're going to do with it. I think the technology itself is like template matching, and it doesn't particularly have a moral value attached to it. It depends on what people want to do with it, and I think like many technologies, you could use it for good, you could use it for evil. Obviously it would be evil for someone to set up a psychiatric company that then used that data to extort people, but I bet someone will do that. And so, there's all kinds of things in this world.
We're totally out. Thank you guys so much for being here. These guys will be hanging around after, maybe, if you want to catch them. But thank you guys so much for being here and for your questions. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks, guys.